I see it.
All right. Good afternoon or evening, everyone. My name is Holley Linkous, and I have been attending Seymour United Methodist Church for a little over a year now, maybe a year and a half. And I recently graduated with my PhD in educational psychology from the University of Tennessee. And I also have my master's in business administration from UT. I'm a mother of two. I have two little girls. They are, Clara is about to turn 3 next week, and Charlie will be 2 in April. So they're very close in age. And I am just really passionate about learning more about how I can be a beacon of hope in our society, especially in our Seymour community. I have lived all over East Tennessee. I've lived in Farragut. I've lived in Hawkins County. And I currently live in South Knoxville. So I've been all over the place, and I have seen a lot of things that I think I would love to apply to this world around us in ways that can make the world a better place.
Okay. Thanks, Holly, and happy birthday almost to Clara. Uh, my name is Paul Seay. I get to serve as the pastor at Seymour United Methodist Church. I'm in my fourth year, and what a year it's been. Um, we have been here. We actually moved here from Hawkins County, so Holly and I have that in common. My wife and daughter and I lived in Hawkins County before we came here. We actually have some mutual friends. Small world thing. So I'm married to Kathleen, and we have a 7-year-old daughter named Elizabeth, who just had a birthday in December. I'm really excited to have this conversation. I'm thankful for this weekend of emphasis on service and learning about the life and legacy of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and for this new Micah 6 project, which hopefully you're hearing more about. And yeah, so we're going to have a conversation. Holly's got some questions she wants to ask, some things that she wants to cover, and I've got some things to share about Dr. King and what his message says to us about being disciples of Jesus. So thanks, Holly, for putting this together, and looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, so like you mentioned, this weekend we are diving deep into the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and we're using this time as an opportunity to launch our Micah 6 advocacy project here at SUMC. This project serves as a way to educate members of our church and our community on areas of need in Seymour. So, for example, on Friday, we shared links about Dr. King and how his impact reached far beyond civil rights into basic human rights. And on Sunday, we collected items for the Knoxville YWCA and provided a free virtual training on domestic violence, again, to raise awareness. So today, on the MLK National Day of Service, we are focusing more specifically on him and how he fits into our mission. So, first things first, many of us have learned the basics in school about the overarching themes promoted by Dr. King. This typically involved focus on peace, unity, loving others, and largely all of this transpired through the abolishment of segregation and racism. While this is true, Paul, you mention often that there is a much bigger picture. Can you elaborate on that?
That's a really good question. I think one of the things I would say about the bigger picture, it's helpful to remember that as we honor Dr. King this weekend and remember the difference that he made, that today he's nearly universally recognized as a great man, as a revolutionary figure, a world changer, and there's widespread appreciation for him and for his work. In his day, it's no secret he was not so widely and wildly popular. He was seen by a lot of people, especially in the white community in the South, um, though not exclusively in the South, as an agitator, a troublemaker, somebody who's sort of a publicity stunt person, But he would, if you had suggested in the late 50s and the 1960s that we would have a holiday, federal holiday, and I'll be off school and I'll be talking about service and unity in the name of the memory of Dr. King, a lot of people would probably not have believed you. I remember as a teenager in Chattanooga, Tennessee, one time, and I've told this story in a sermon before. I'll be brief about it, but a friend of mine had picked up at a yard sale a poster of Martin Luther King, and on the way out the door of his house, his uncle was over to visit. He showed it to his uncle. He was really excited about it. His uncle was far from excited, and he got angry. He got defensive, and he said, I remember that troublemaker, that, and then he used an awful lot of bad language and slurs, because that was less than 30 years after King's death, and so it was a reminder to me that I've held on to, that King's name and work did not always evoke the best, our better angels among some people, and there was a lot of resistance and lingering resentment about him. So I think that's important to remember, because his work, his message, his legacy still challenges us, and in many ways there are things that he says and calls us to that we may not want to hear. We may like to focus on the easier stuff, the happier stuff, but the true work of justice and the hard work of seeking reconciliation and truth telling is difficult, and we don't always want to do that. I'll put myself at the front of the line. I sometimes focus on the positive stuff. I think it's also important to point out that by April of 1968, when he died, when he got to Memphis for the sanitation workers strike, King had in a lot of ways had been alienated by a lot of people who had stood with him and supported him. They thought that he had outlived his usefulness, that he'd gone too far, and that was among some of his white allies. And other people in more militant segments of the civil rights movement felt like they had lost patience with King, that he wasn't getting enough done, that he was too compassionate, too slow, and that they wanted results. And so both groups had sort of moved away from him. So at the time of his death, a lot of people had grown impatient with him. The other thing I would say about the larger picture, and this is the true larger picture, is we got to remember that King was first and foremost not a community organizer, but a Baptist minister. He was a minister of the gospel, and his work grew out of his ministry in sharing the gospel of Jesus, his devotion to Jesus. And I think the larger culture misses that. You know, you hear Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but we remember he's Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But I think we miss that too. And in the same way that he was controversial on his day, Jesus was and is, if we really listen to him. The prophets spoke hard truths. And so I think there's something for us in that is, as Christians, to be open to hearing what King says to us in our faith and our seeking to be faithful to Jesus, and not just resting content or with what's convenient, but really with the Holy Spirit's help, examining our lives and our church and our society. And so I think that's part of the larger picture. Is that kind of what you were after, that long answer?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. That was really, I just know we had talked about briefly just some of the challenges and the difficulties that um, are often maybe overshadowed by some of the victories of that time. But so, in a sense, you can kind of see, or one can kind of see, that Dr. King's vision and his mission, the service of his heart and soul, was not so easy. So he gave his life literally for his dream, a dream based largely, again, like you mentioned, on his faith, and it was inspired by God. we can see the exemplification of the call in Micah 6:8 through Dr. King's work. One of the attributed quotes of Dr. King is, "What are you doing for others?" So, Paul, how can this quote inspire us to do the Lord's work in the Seymour community?
It's a good question to keep in front of ourselves, and not just let it become a cliche, but maybe make it part of our prayer time and our devotional time. What am I doing for others? What are we doing for others? And again, sometimes I think contentment can be the real enemy. We can say, well, I do pretty well, but we need to continually ask ourselves the question. One thing I think is, maybe it calls us to try to think and imagine from the perspective of others. So sometimes we think we know what others need, and so then we get to decide when we've done enough. But maybe the question, what am I doing for others, should lead us to walk a mile in their shoes, and say, maybe it really is much more to do. It can be frightening at times to because keeping things sort of from my perspective is a way of controlling things. And if I really try to see it from your perspective and really uh, listen to what you're going through, I have to relinquish some control on the narrative. And we tend to seek, I think, stability in those times. So, but I think also uh, it helps us remember that the church is not a country club. It's not a place for entertainment. It's a place where we learn how to trust Jesus and to live life in Jesus. And so, what are you doing for others? That question puts us in touch with a much larger purpose, for the church and for our lives.
Definitely, I agree. And I'm really excited about the response that so many in our church community have had to the initiation of this project, that we're moving forward with this weekend. I'm very excited that we have such
Yeah,
support
yeah,
in our community, and especially from you as well.
yeah.
So okay, so we've kind of gone big picture on our discussion so far, but another widely known focus of Dr. King was nonviolence and the concept
Mhm.
of nonviolence. So let's talk about that for just a moment.
Okay.
I think there is a perception around nonviolence that lends itself to being all about like sentimental love and even silence or passivity.
Yeah.
Um, I have seen that this is not at all the approach taken by Dr. King and his civil rights activists of that time. In fact, the nonviolent approach is intended to be strategic and intentional.
Hmm.
Some of the research that I did while building upon this question, I was able to uncover that there are in fact principles of nonviolence. So,
Hmm.
for example, number 3 is nonviolence seeks to defeat injustice, not people. And number 4 says nonviolence holds that suffering for a cause can educate and transform people and societies.
Hmm.
And I think the rhetoric that is used and that he used to build and define these tactics of nonviolence is far from complacent. How do you feel about these concepts of nonviolence? And can you talk a little bit more in depth about that?
Yeah, it's an important topic, and it's an important part of his legacy that also gets lost a little bit. I think, and I think you're exactly right that nonviolence, as King practiced it, was anything but passive. They talked about nonviolent direct action, and one of the reasons that there are principles that have been written down about the nonviolent methods that he employed was that part of the movement, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, would actually train people before they would send them out for nonviolent direct action, because you had to think through what you're doing, why you were doing it, how you were going to respond. You changed your background there to the Edmund Pettus Bridge, which is one of the most iconic and awful scenes of the civil rights movement, but also an example of how nonviolence can change things. So the King's uh, conference and his folks marched across the bridge and were beaten as they marched to try to register to vote. And in that sense, it wasn't nonviolence because the opposition was violent, but in their refusal to fight back, it opened the eyes of the nation. And so that's how one of the ways that nonviolence can educate. If they had fought back, if they had just had a battle right there on the bridge, it would have turned out very differently. The cause would have been lost in the violence and bloodshed. And so by not returning evil for evil, by turning the other cheek, the message came through. King would say nonviolence is not passive but powerful. It's an empowerment, and it's a tool that can particularly be used by the disenfranchised who may not have access to the means that the powerful do. And so it's a way of harnessing a greater power. It's a creative response. I think he would say that violence ultimately probably is not going to convince those that you struggle against in the way that nonviolence can. So I've got a couple of quotes here, if I may, just the things that he said about nonviolence and why that was the method that he and the people in his movement chose. So he says, if one is in search of a better job, it does not help to burn down the factory. If one needs more adequate education, shooting the principal will not help. Or if housing is the goal, only building and construction will produce that end. To destroy anything, person or property, can't bring us closer to the goal that we seek. And so by being nonviolent, they sought to be constructive rather than destructive. Another quote is that he said, and this gets at the spiritual dimension of it. He says, physical force can never solve the underlying problems that we struggle with. So he felt like, with maybe by being violent, you might win a temporary victory, but the spiritual problem, of which the societal problem is a manifestation, goes on. But nonviolence actually tries to minister to the spirit of both victim and perpetrator. And then I think the last quote that I'll share, if I can find it, that is, oh yeah. So he says, one of the things that they would do is they would hold nonviolent marches or protests, and then if the opposition did use violence, then again, like with the Pettus Bridge, it dramatized the situation and raised awareness. And he was aware of that. So he says, we hope in trying to dramatize these situations by getting thousands and thousands of people around this movement, that the government will be forced to reevaluate its policies, namely segregation and voting rights and civil rights. So it's a way of raising awareness. From a Christian perspective, again, he's a Baptist minister. I think his ultimate example is Jesus. And finally, I don't think I'm going too far in saying that the resurrection of Jesus is God's nonviolent response to the crucifixion of the Son of God. So that's how God gets things done as well.
Yeah, it's awesome that you bring up those spiritual background to this concept of nonviolence. I'm actually reading John Lewis's Across That Bridge, his memoir. And so I recently read a quote from him, and I don't have the book in front of me, but it was something along the lines of, they really condition themselves in their faith. And if you have the faith that they had the belief that God ultimately doesn't want this inequality for his children. And the battle has already been won. So if they went forward, John Lewis was very severely injured on Edmund Pettus Bridge, so for him to even come before his passing and write this book about how he still would have done the same thing, knowing that he believes in that faith and that the battle has already been won by our God. To me, that just takes such conviction that they would be willing to put their lives on the line again for such a concept, I guess.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and I think that's part of what uh, the, a big part of what it means to affirm the resurrection is that God has won the battle in raising Jesus from the dead. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so again, another passion of Dr. King was kind of late, I think it's something that nonviolence is somewhat founded in, which is love in action, or agape. And so our church has a connection to this concept. It's something we talk about often. Can you talk about this, kind of explain, like, on the grander scale of about the concept of agape, and then also how it plays out within our church and within our Seymour community as well?
I'm honored that you think that I could explain on a grander scale. Thank you. Uh, the word agape. So we have a ministry here at our church called agape, AGAPE, and it comes from a Greek word that means love. King really liked this word, um, and he did not invent this distinction. That people have noticed for a long time that in the New Testament, primarily, it's not the only three, but there's three words for love that are used in Greek. In English, love is the word, but in Greek, it's eros, where we get erotic, a romantic love. Um, Phileo, philia, where we get friendship love. It's where Philadelphia comes from, brotherly love, and agape. And so very often agape is, all of them mean love, and all of them are a gift from God. But agape has come to be associated with selfless love. It's the word that the Apostle Paul uses in 1 Corinthians 13, the great chapter on love. And so when we were looking for a name for this ministry that we have, where we collect spare change, we collect spare dollar bills, we take checks, but it's a fund that people can give to called the Agape Fund, and we use it exclusively to try to bless the community. So if we hear of a need, we have a small committee of people that will get together and try to see if they can meet that need somewhat through the Agape Fund. No strings attached, unconditional. So we have helped people who were sick or who were down on their luck or having a hard time. We also purchased a new commercial cooler for Cross Food Ministries through that, and we just and it's caught on, and people really like to give to agape and are excited. So I think it shows the heart of our church. I think this church has always had a heart for the community, but I've seen over the past 4 years, I've seen that grow, and I feel like we've become very community and other oriented, and this Agape Fund is one way that we do that. But I like using that word because it reminds us of our calling to live and to love like Jesus. Yeah.
Awesome. I really appreciate your willingness to have this discussion. I think, in my opinion, and maybe others, that social justice can only exist where there is a willingness to have hard conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been, honestly, we've been pretty safe in the things that we've talked about and our ability to talk about the topics that we have with such freedom. This is something that we have the ability to do, and we are not, I guess we have a little bit more freedom than maybe some other people would have to talk about these things. And I'm hoping that the Micah 6 committee project, as we go forward,
Not a committee.
right, not a committee, that we're able to kind of start to have even more of the hard conversations that are especially needed in helping our community within and outside of the walls of our church. Hopefully, we can start to see some really big, God things, I guess. That's
Yeah.
we're saying. Do you have any final thoughts? anything you would like to share about Dr. King and his legacy, or the Micah 6 project as we look towards the future before we wrap up our conversation today?
I think that you named it just there, is that this can be challenging work, and I would exhort all of us to be risk takers in this sense, and trust that these hard conversations um, grow out of, just as they did for King, our faith in Jesus. It's not a partisan political thing that we're trying to do covertly. We want people from all backgrounds, all parties, all walks of life to come together and be able to have these hard conversations, to speak and to listen and to ask God to be in our speaking and listening. We do shy away from talking about issues of race and economics and justice and needs in our community, and we won't always agree, and we may get frustrated with each other. But that's not a reason to back away. If I say something that, that you disagree with, you eventually you'll figure out that I'm right. No, but it you can tell me, maybe I need to rethink the way I said it, or rethink what I said. And it goes all the way around. But this comes through relationship. What I don't want to do is just stand up and just feel like I'm going to drop some truth on you, and you just got to deal with it. I feel like sometimes it's best done in a through friendship and through mutuality, to where I can speak, but I can also listen, and you can speak and listen, and we can trust God with the results that, as you said, as the battle has been won, and so we're trying our best with God's help to live into God's vision for our lives. So thanks for putting this together. And I see one more background there, the King Monument there in DC. Yeah.
Which I have never actually seen. So I really want to go see that one
You
day
know,
when I can.
yeah. Kathleen and I were in DC the weekend that it opened years ago, and I think that was 2011. So it's 10 years ago. But or it was the day before it opened, but you could go see it. But the traffic was so bad around it, and we had somewhere to be, that we just thought, well, we'll come back. And now I wish that we had braved the traffic a little more and gone. So, but yeah, thanks again. That this is maybe we should do this again.
Awesome. Thank you so much again for your willingness to talk about Dr. King.
My pleasure.